It was my first day on the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. The place was old, really old. The kind of hospital that creaked with every step, where the walls seemed to have absorbed decades of pain, fear, and loss. I'd heard stories from the other nurses, tales whispered in the break room about Ward C, but I wasn't one for ghost stories. I was here to do my job. Ward C had been closed for years, abandoned after some budget cuts. No one went there anymore, except for maintenance, and even they didn't like to linger. I didn't care about the rumors, about the woman in white that people claimed to see wandering the halls at night, or the strange noises that echoed down the empty corridors. I was here to help people, not chase shadows. That first night, I had my usual rounds. The ER was quiet, just a few patients. I walked past the locked doors of Ward C a couple of times, feeling that uneasy chill that comes with old, forgotten places. The fluorescent lights in the hall flickered now and then, but I chalked it up to bad wiring. I didn't have time for ghost stories. At around 2 a.m., I heard it, the sound of a door creaking open. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise was faint but unmistakable, coming from behind me. Slowly, I turned around and saw the door to Ward C slightly ajar. I froze, unsure of what to do. The door had been locked just an hour ago when I last passed it. I was certain of that. But now, it hung open, just a crack. I stared at it, waiting for something, anything to happen. When nothing did, I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a faulty lock. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to check it out, if only to prove to myself that there was nothing there. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped closer to the door, hesitating for just a moment before pushing it open. The hinges groaned in protest, and the sound echoed down the dark hallway beyond. I shined the light into the corridor, but all I could see were empty rooms, forgotten beds, and old equipment covered in dust. I stepped inside and the door closed behind me with a soft thud. The air was colder here, and it smelled stale, like the room hadn't been touched in years. I moved down the hallway slowly, my footsteps sounding too loud in the stillness. As I reached the first room, I heard it again, a soft whisper, like someone saying my name. I stopped, holding my breath, and listened. The whisper came again, clearer this time from further down the hall. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was calling to me. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked right back out of that ward. But I didn't. Something compelled me to keep going, to find the source of the voice. I stepped into one of the rooms, shining my flashlight around. The bed was neatly made, but the sheets were yellowed with age. A chair sat by the window, its upholstery torn and faded. There was nothing unusual about the room, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut, trapping me inside. I ran to it, trying to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, and I banged on the door, shouting for help. The hospital was nearly empty at this hour. No one would hear me. Then, the whispers returned, louder this time, surrounding me from all sides. I spun around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. In the corner of the room, something moved. I swung my flashlight toward it, but it flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with it, desperate to get it working again. When the light finally flickered back on, I saw her. She was standing by the bed, her long dark hair hanging over her face. Her hospital gown was tattered, stained with something dark. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring at me with hollow, sunken eyes. I backed away, my hand fumbling for the door handle. But it was useless. The door wouldn't open. The woman took a step toward me, her bare feet dragging across the floor. She raised a hand, reaching out for me. I screamed, pounding on the door, begging for it to open. And then, just as suddenly as it had locked, the door flew open, and I stumbled out into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I was back at the nurse's station, breathless and shaking. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, not because they wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't want to believe it myself. The door to Ward C was closed again, locked as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew the truth. The whispers, the woman, they were real. And they were still there, waiting in the darkness of Ward C, waiting for someone foolish enough to open that door again. I never worked another night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. The wind howled outside as I walked through the quiet corridors of Northridge Hospital. It was a small hospital, old and underfunded, the kind of place where people rarely visited unless they had to. I had just started working the night shift a few weeks ago, and though the pay was decent, the hospital had a strange vibe that I couldn't shake. The staff joked about it being haunted, especially the old wing, but I always brushed it off. Ghost stories were just that, stories. My rounds took me through the main wards, where a few patients slept peacefully, machines beeping steadily by their bedsides. It was a slow night, which I appreciated. I liked the quiet. It gave me time to think. As I finished checking in on the last patient in the ICU, I glanced at the clock. Just past midnight. That's when I heard it. A soft rhythmic tapping sound, faint but steady. I paused, listening closely. It seemed to be coming from the hallway that led to the old wing of the hospital. The old wing had been closed for years, ever since budget cuts had forced the hospital to shut down most of its unused areas. No one went there anymore, at least. No one was supposed to. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the source of the sound. The hallway leading to the old wing was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering weakly. The further I walked, the colder it seemed to get. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and kept moving. The door to the old wing was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The hinges groaned, the sound echoing in the empty corridor beyond. I shined my flashlight into the darkness. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mildew was thick. The rooms were empty, their doors hanging open like silent mouths. I took a step inside, and the door closed behind me with a soft click. The tapping sound was louder now, coming from further down the hall. My heart pounded in my chest, but I told myself it was probably just some loose piping or a forgotten maintenance issue. There had to be a logical explanation. I followed the sound down the hallway, passing room after room, each one as dark and empty as the last. The tapping grew louder as I approached room 409. The door was closed, unlike the others. A cold draft seeped from under the door, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I reached for the handle but stopped. Something about this felt wrong. The stories about the old wing came flooding back to me. About the strange noises, the shadows that moved when no one was there, the patients who had supposedly died under mysterious circumstances. I tried to push those thoughts away. I was a nurse, trained to help people, not be scared by old tales. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering bulb in the hallway behind me. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a single hospital bed in the center of the room. The sheets were neatly made, untouched, as if no one had been there in years. But the tapping sound was louder now, echoing off the walls. I stepped inside, shining my light around the room. There was nothing, no one. The tapping stopped. The room was deathly silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making it hard to breathe. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I whipped the flashlight around, and for a brief moment, I saw her. A woman, pale and gaunt, sitting in the corner of the room. Her hair was matted, hanging in clumps over her face, and she was dressed in a hospital gown that was far too big for her frail body. She was tapping her fingers on the floor, the same rhythmic sound I had been hearing. Her eyes were wide, staring at me with a hollow, vacant expression. I froze, unable to move, unable to speak. She slowly lifted her head, her mouth twisting into a smile that sent chills down my spine. She raised a bony finger to her lips and whispered, "Shh," and then she was gone. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The room was empty again, just as it had been when I first entered. But the cold feeling remained, like the room itself had absorbed the fear I felt. I didn't wait to see if she would come back. I ran out of the room, down the hallway, and didn't stop until I was back in the brightly lit part of the hospital. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps. I never told anyone what I saw that night. Who would believe me? But I knew, deep down, that something was wrong with room 409. Something dark, something that didn't want to be disturbed. From that night on, I made sure to avoid the old wing, and every time I passed by the door leading to it, I could still hear that soft rhythmic tapping in the distance, like a warning to stay away. But sometimes, late at night, I couldn't help but wonder if she was still there, sitting in the dark, waiting for someone else to find her.